Welcome back to Bombastic Nation and Ting and Ting and Ting. I'm Mr. Giant and I'm back with some more vibes for you. Yes, and this one was recommended for me by someone that watches my videos. His name is Sebastian, and I'm not gonna try to pronounce his last name, but his name is Sebastian, and for some reason he can't comment on my stuff, so he sent me this through the email, and I have an email in the description. You could send videos there if you want me to watch it. So use the email in the description to send me videos that you would like me to react to. This is how Sebastian here send them. Thank you, my brethren. We're gonna watch this one here. This one is called Life in East Germany, an animated history. Something that I'm interested in, actually, because you heard so much about East Germany, especially about the Olympics and all that stuff. All you're seeing is the one-sided version of what people think East Germany was. Now, I don't know what it was like in there. That's why this is so intriguing to me. So let's go ahead and YouTube and simmer and see what life in East Germany was.
It is August 1945, and the guns have gone silent across Europe. The Third Reich is no more, its ambitions crushed beneath the overwhelming power of the Allied nations and Comintern. Yet amidst the ruins, people still remain. Although battered and beaten, the hardy German spirit still endures. But unbeknownst to them, they are about to become pawns in an even greater war. One fought not with guns and bombs, but with economics and ideology.
Politics.
At the Potsdam Conference, Germany was divided between the Allied powers. With the stroke of a pen, 16 million people fell under Soviet dominion. The two halves of the nation would now stand at odds. On one side, a capitalist buffer state against the menace of communism. On the other, a glorious socialist utopia. At least, that was the theory.
You see, you could tell from which worldview that they're coming from. The menace, communist society. Listen. I know some people are going to think it's stupid of me to think that we are wrong of me. Here's the thing. I don't care what political system there is. All political systems or political systems are based on the fact that there are people ruling and there are people following. And usually, sooner or later, even if the ruling class have the best intentions, if they're there too long, if the system stays in place too long, people are going to figure out how to manipulate those systems, any system at all. And then some people are going to get rich, and some people are going to get poor. You know what I'm saying and things? So it doesn't matter to me if it's communist, capitalist, imperialist, socialist. After a while, especially when the people get complacent and they're not paying attention, certain people who have generations and generations of people in power, which is what's happening now, you know what I mean? Now they want to have the father as the president, the daughter as the president, and the son as the president. Come on, what do you think's going to happen there? So, personally, I think elections should be two times, every 2 years. You know what I'm saying? I think it should be every 2 years, not 4 years. 4 years is too much time for them to implement stuff that's going to create problems. See, 2 years would probably force them into working together to figure out something. The less time they have to sit down there and think and rake in the money, unless they put it on steroids to rake in the money. But I don't know. That's my humble opinion. What do you think? Drop it in the comment section and see and then tell me what you guys think of it. Let's keep going here.
Hi, I'm Griffin Johnson, the Armchair Historian. In today's video, we're going to take a look at what life was like in the German Democratic Republic, also known as East Germany. This Soviet puppet state imagined itself as a glorious communist utopia, while Western propaganda painted it as a nightmarish dystopia.
Well, at least he's
as is so often the case, the truth is more complicated and lies somewhere between these two envisioned extremes. Before we begin today's video, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Money. Thanks to the pandemic, being able to save while shopping online has become a real skill for many people. But it's not always easy to hunt for discounts, special offers, and coupons in the digital marketplace. Fortunately, Honey provides you with a free online shopping tool that scours the internet for promo codes and applies them to your card. The way it works is very simple. When you're using any of your favorite sites, like Amazon, Grubhub, or Best Buy, Honey will show you a drop-down box with the option to... As soon as the Soviets began their occupation, they treated their new subjects harshly. The defeated populace could only watch as Russian soldiers rapidly dismantled what little remained of their industrial infrastructure and shipped it back to Russia. Tens of thousands of suspected Nazi sympathizers or anti-communists were rounded up and imprisoned at repurposed concentration camps.
It's a flip side there, you know what I mean? But they use the same tool. Nazis, you know what I mean? And we need to crush them, you know? And what they're doing there is because of the people probably tired of the Nazis. They use that to solidify, or that's one of the things they use to solidify their power, because it's easy if somebody is like considered a dictator, or they are a dictator and they were terrorizing people and they were suffering. Anybody who come along and start talking about going up against them will probably just sit back for a while, and let stuff happen to them, because they're thinking anything will be better than where they came from. You know what I mean? But it seems like if the Russians just jump in there and start going, hey, we want this, we'll take this, we want this. Of course, I'm not going to say the Russians, because that's encompassing all the citizens on there, and that's an unfair assessment. Let's just say the leaders. The leaders at the time were doing that. Now, of course, they were saying they're taking in the name of helping their people, but did they really though? I'm going to have to look into that and see. Let's keep going.
Simultaneously, the Soviets set to work laying the political foundations for a communist regime in East Germany. In 1946, the occupiers forcibly merged two German political parties, the Communist Party and the Social Democratic Party, to form the Socialist Unity Party of Germany, or
Socialist
SED.
Unity.
The SED was quickly purged of all opponents of Stalinism and was then installed as the sole ruling party in the new government. In October of 1949, the Soviets formally turned over political control over their occupied zone to the SED, establishing the German, air quotes, Democratic Republic, or GDR, as a new, air quotes, independent nation. From the moment of its creation, East Germany and its people were faced with tremendous hardship. The western portion of Germany, namely the Ruhr Valley, had always been the industrial heart of the nation, and its loss left the GDR with almost no industrial capacity. This resulted in devastating shortages of most essential goods, and the population suffered from severe malnourishment. With nothing available to purchase, laborers had no incentive to work, which caused the economy to stagnate even further. As the beleaguered citizens of East Germany struggled to survive, their former countrymen in the West were already experiencing economic recovery thanks to the American aid under what was called the Marshall Plan. When news of this supposed prosperity reached the GDR, desperate people began to flee to the West in the tens of thousands. The mass exodus from East Germany only worsened its economic conditions, as young people, skilled laborers, and intellectuals vacated the country in droves. The SED attempted to counteract this brain drain with aggressive propaganda campaigns, framing the decision to leave East Germany as an act of political and moral backwardness and depravity. But there was nothing physically stopping people from leaving, and so the exodus continued. The task of halting this flow of emigration and reviving the economy fell to General Secretary of the SED, Walter Ulbricht. In 1952, Ulbricht decided that...
I mean, is that immigration though? They're going from Germany to Germany. You split the country in half, call one East and one West, and tell those people they're different. It's an ideological thing. That's just crazy.
In order to accomplish this goal, he needed to follow the example of the USSR by rapidly converting East Germany into a proper communist society using a good old 5-year plan. In carrying out this plan, Ulbricht demonstrated that he had truly embraced the teachings of Stalin by successfully starving his people even further and making everything much, much worse. His attempts to collectivize agriculture led to disastrous food shortages,
How did he
and
think
the
that
high
was going to be
taxes
okay?
on private enterprise caused those consumer goods, which had crept back onto the shelves, to disappear once again. The party tried to compensate for these new shortages by increasing worker quotas, requiring 10% more effort to earn the same wages. This last burden finally pushed people over the edge, and hundreds of thousands more fled to the west. In the summer of 1953, even after the Soviets had forced Ulbricht to dial back most of his collectivization efforts, a workers' strike broke out in East Berlin, which quickly grew into a protest demanding free elections and other reforms. The movement soon spread across the country, and within days, 340,000 people were protesting in every city and almost every large town in East Germany. The situation was dire enough that Ulbricht was forced to call on the Soviets for help, and it was only upon the arrival of their tanks and armed soldiers that the unrest was finally quelled. And so migration to the west continued. By the beginning of the 1960s, nearly 4 million people had fled the GDR since its foundation, representing over a quarter of the country's original population.
That's mass
officials tried several tactics
exodus.
to keep people from escaping, including fortifying their border with West Germany. But citizens continued to flee through Berlin. Due to its unusual status as a single city divided between Soviet East and Allied West, it was difficult to stop people from crossing the border, turning the former capital into a city-sized loophole through which over 90% of the migrants fleeing East Germany were able to escape. By 1961, the party had had enough and finally decided to close the border with the construction of the Berlin Wall. This 156-kilometer or 97-mile barrier effectively cut off the people of East Germany from the west. Where nearly 4 million had escaped since 1949, only 5,000 more would manage to abscond over the next 30 years.
Wow.
As the 1960s progressed,
Guess the wall
quality of
works,
life
huh?
slowly improved in the GDR. After losing a quarter of their number, the remaining population of the nation slowly realized that there was no longer a shortage of housing or jobs. Production of consumer goods and strategic resources gradually increased, and by the end of the decade, East Germany had the richest economy in the Eastern Bloc. But while more goods were being produced, not everything was consistently available. The government was in control of all production. The resulting fluctuations led to massive lines outside of stores and the widespread hoarding of common goods. Those without access to hard currency from the West were subject to the whims of the party's economic planners, and often had to wait months or even years for certain goods to become available. For example, those wishing to purchase a sleek, stylish, high-performing East German automobile would have no trouble paying for it, but they would have to wait up to 13 years to actually receive their vehicle.
What?
Despite
Wow,
the long
that's
waits,
crazy.
Standards of living in East Germany did improve significantly in the 1960s, but unrest and opposition to the communist government remained. Despite ongoing discontent, there was never another widespread rebellion like the 1953 uprising until the Soviet Union began to collapse. This effective suppression of unrest was all thanks to the Ministry of State Security, also known as the Stasi. The Stasi was one of the most feared secret police forces in the Eastern Bloc, and between their founding in 1950 and their dissolution after German reunification, they carried out one of the most extensive mass surveillance programs in the pre-digital age. They employed over 170,000 informants among the civilian population, although some estimates suggest there could have been as many as 500,000.
Wow.
There were Stasi agents in every apartment building, every factory, every hospital and university, watching and listening for any sign of subversive or anti-communist behavior. Until 1970, dissidents identified by this surveillance network were simply arrested, dragged off somewhere, and tortured until they gave up any accomplices before being imprisoned. In the 1970s, the Stasi decided that these methods were too crude and began to employ a form of psychological warfare called Zersetzung, which literally means decomposition. These insidious tactics and mass surveillance created a culture of suspicion and fear in much of the East German populace. The eyes of the Stasi were everywhere. Despite this pervasive fear of Stasi surveillance and harsh state censorship, a vibrant and distinct art and material culture flourished in the GDR. The identity that developed within these restrictions was defined largely in opposition to the West, emphasizing the ways in which the people of East Germany were distinct from, and of course superior to, those in the West. Movies and plays produced by the state-owned studios and theaters celebrated the ordinary working-class heroes of socialism, along with brave underdogs who fought against fascism and imperialism. When it came to women's rights, East Germany rejected the traditional conservative gender roles still enforced in West Germany in favor for greater autonomy for women in marriage and in the workplace. Birth control was more widely accepted and available, and women were encouraged to participate in the workplace rather than remaining at home.
The counter, oh man, look at that.
This cultural movement took hold most strongly among the older generation, while the youth, as they often do, chose to rebel. In the late 1970s and 80s, as the governments of both German nations were pushing for reconciliation and greater cooperation, cultural influences from the West began to seep in and catch on with the younger generation. Punk and rock music became popular, and tech-savvy teenagers became fascinated by Western video games. This created a cultural divide in the GDR, with the old guard still stubbornly in support of the communist system that kept them fed, sheltered, and employed, while young, educated East Germans grew more and more fascinated with the West and opposed the status quo. By 1989, discontent with the communist policies erupted into widespread protests for the first time since 1953, and this time the Soviet army was in no position to intervene. In November, the Berlin Wall was taken down, and the SED abolished the provision in the Constitution guaranteeing communist control of the government. The following year, East and West Germany were formally reunited. The reunification of Germany was met with approval from both sides of the old border. But the divisions between the two halves of this new nation did not disappear overnight. Many factories in the East were closed, and widespread unemployment reappeared for the first time in decades. For many, particularly less educated men who had lost the stable jobs they'd enjoyed in the communist era, there was a sense that the West had finally won, and the East was now getting left behind. Even to this day, many Germans in the East feel a sense of nostalgia for the days of the GDR, when everyone enjoyed, if not prosperity, at least stability and solidarity within the communist system. While most historians acknowledge that East Germany was a repressive dictatorship, there are still Germans today who remember it fondly and identify more as East Germans than Germans. As always, it is impossible to simply classify a nation or its people one way or the other.
Yep.
A final thank you to our sponsor, Honey. Clicking the link down below really...
See, I could equate that to my island. Like, my parents, they were followers of the Prime Minister before the Revolution, Gary. Sir E.M. Gary was his name. Eric Matthew Gary. And I know him well. I used to go to a lot of his political rallies with my mom and stuff like that. She was a staunch supporter, so was my dad. And and he took them out of an era where supposedly colonialist ideas were oppressing them, and then the young people got restless and they brought in a socialist type government, so I guess that's just history repeating itself everywhere, you know what I mean? Young people going to get fed up, and I mean to a certain extent it's happening here right now. The baby boomers are going, those millennials, oh, those lazy millennials, you know what I mean? And so you see what Bob Marley called it, the generation gap. Yeah, that's what Bob Marley called it. There's a gap there, you know what I mean? But here's what I'm saying. Well, here's what I'm thinking. Like, for instance, if somebody's in power for so long, people become complacent. And they start doing things subconsciously that actually teaches the next generation, and this is just my little theory here, teach the next generation who they are. And you could see it happening in real time right now. Like, for instance, a lot of old people complain of how lazy young people are, right? But where I work at the grocery store, you would see the older people come in with the younger people. Now, when I was a kid and I went to the grocery store with my mom would say, hey, go help bag. Not no, not now. The older people are like telling the younger people, it's his job. You don't have to do that. Yeah, blah, blah, blah. You know, they don't teach them to help. They don't teach them, like, hey, you gotta do stuff too. And then they complain about how lazy they are and they don't want to do anything. Well, subconsciously you're doing it by learning it for they're learning it from you, by you telling them, oh, that's his job. And that's not just where I work, that's just in everything. You don't have to do that. He's supposed to do it, you know what I mean? The humanity has been ripped out to these kids to think, and it's not all of them. Well, actually, the very young kids always running, coming to help, help, to buy groceries and stuff. But those teenagers, man, they come in with their grandparents and they just stand there on the phone. Tip, 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 tip. You know what I'm saying? So, where do they learn it from? And that's kind of simple, but it could go on a broad spectrum too. Anyway, man, y'all, thank you all for listening, watching this with me and thing, you know what I mean? I'm going to leave a link in the description to this video so you could go check it out without me babbling, you know what I mean? And I am going to put some cards up with other videos. Click on them, go check them out. Just keep watching, binge watch it. Get you some popcorn, something to drink, and enjoy. And in the meantime, you all take care of each other, alright? Cool runnings.